Mitt Romney is shaping up as the man to beat in the contest for the Republican presidential nomination after a clear victory in the primary in New Hampshire. The former Massachusetts governor won close to 40% of the vote, while Congressman Ron Paul came in second with 23%. All 6 contenders have vowed to fight on to the next all-important vote in South Carolina later this month, a state with a very different electorate. For his analysis of the race thus far, I spoke earlier to Professor James Fallows, Chair in US Media at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney and National Correspondent for the Atlantic Monthly magazine. James Fallows, how significant is this win for Mitt Romney in New Hampshire?
It's not absolutely conclusive, but it certainly is significant. Last week, as many of your viewers will recall, he had a very, very narrow single-digit win over Rick Santorum in Iowa. Now he has an enormous win over Ron Paul and Jon Huntsman in New Hampshire. 2 very different states, 2 different constituencies, but wins in both of them. He goes on to South Carolina next week, which is a more conservative place where he won't have such a large advantage. But this certainly has turned out as well for Governor Romney as he could have expected.
Now, what of the other contenders? Ron Paul came in second.
Yes, Ron Paul has demonstrated that he has a quite devoted base. It's different from the rest of the Republican candidates because Ron Paul's libertarian argument is appealing in part of its foreign policy aspects to traditionally a Democratic or independent constituency and young people, too. He's anti the war on drugs and things like that. He's anti any kind of control on same-sex activity. But then also his domestic economic policy is more traditionally conservative. So it's a different group from the rest. And it seems to be a sort of 20 to 25% core of the Republican base. Doesn't get smaller or larger, and they're very enthusiastic. And
Jon Huntsman has turned out to do quite well. Do you think he has any chance long term?
He did well, but I think this was actually quite a heartbreak for the Huntsman campaign. Just as Rick Santorum last week had essentially lived in Iowa for the preceding year, he went to every one of the 99 counties in Iowa. He based his entire appeal on some connection to the very conservative religious base of Iowa Republicans. Jon Huntsman had done something comparable in New Hampshire these last 7 or 8 months, where he thought this was the place where he could make his stand for a more moderate-seeming version of the Republican argument, saying that he was a believer in global warming and climate change. He was much more tolerant on same-sex issues once again. And the fact that he came in third behind Ron Paul and with fewer than half the votes than Mitt Romney got, I think is a disappointment. The Huntsman campaign put on a brave face after the results, saying that third place gave them a ticket to go on to South Carolina, but that is less promising terrain for him. So I think this is seen as a disappointment for the Huntsman troops.
And that next vote, as you say, South Carolina, very important historically in this Republican race.
Yes, it will sort of ratify the results. It would be extremely unusual. I believe it would be actually historically unprecedented for someone who did not win in either Iowa or New Hampshire to go on to become the nominee, since Governor Romney has now won in both those places, and there is no reason to think that he'll have a very terrible weakness in South Carolina. Anything can happen, but he is the odds-on favorite now to win the nomination, unless some dynamic that we don't know anything about arises. His opponents in the last week or 2 have been fighting at him bitterly. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich has been almost uncontrolled in his splenetic view of former Governor Romney, and Santorum has been taking some shots as well. So I think that from Governor Romney's point of view, the sooner this can be wrapped up, the better for his prospects and the parties, too.
Do you think that some of those attacks that have been launched by other Republicans may in fact play into the hands of the Democrats ultimately?
Oh, I think that the main challenge for the Obama administration and many congressional Democrats right now is biting their tongues and containing their smiles as they see how bitter some of this fratricide is within the Republican field. There is a problem for Governor Romney, which is that he has seemed to lack a lot of the real conservative base has been suspicious of him. He was, after all, the governor of Massachusetts, which is a historically liberal state. He passed there a health care law which was structurally similar to the famed Obamacare on the national level. He is a Mormon, a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and for many fundamentalist Christian conservatives, that is a problem. They see it as being a not really a Christian sect, and in part of the Republican base, there is some resistance to voting for Mormons. So I think the challenge for Governor Romney will be avoiding some of the attacks on his past as a venture capitalist, of trying to get people to surround him. So the Democrats would like this race to go on as long as it possibly can, and for more and more wounding videos to be made about Governor Romney by the other Republicans. So they are just crossing their fingers that after South Carolina, then Florida, then the rest of the states, this thing keeps rolling on.
And I guess the big issue is he electable, or is he just the best of a motley bunch?
It is a very unusual, indeed, in my experience, unprecedented Republican field this time, because on past standards, there really has been only one or one and a half plausible candidates for the nomination this time. Former Governor Romney has the pedigree that almost all past Republican or Democratic nominees have had. He's run before. He came in second 4 years ago to John McCain. He has experience as a governor. He's been a business leader. He has a kind of track record, and he has shown, obviously, in Massachusetts that he can appeal in some cases to Democrats and to independents. And most of the other candidates, with the exception of Governor Huntsman, seem to have self-limiting constituencies where you can't really imagine them winning a national campaign against Barack Obama. But the fact there are so few sort of mainstream candidates this time, and that all the enthusiasm has been on the more fractional or niche type candidates, has made this unusual, and I think has many Republicans worried that even though President Obama has seemed vulnerable in many ways, largely because of economic problems, they're wondering if the party can compose itself quickly enough to be able to take him on.
Do you see some of the contenders dropping out soon?
You would have thought if there were to be a ruthless dropping out tonight, it probably would have been Governor Huntsman. Even though he came in third and had 17% of the vote, he was probably the one who was most disappointed here relative to what he would have thought. But he said he's going on to South Carolina. He had an unfortunate moment in his speech where he said this campaign is headed south. He meant South Carolina. In American lexicon, that's that means we're going off the cliff. But I think that so. But he said he would stay in. Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, had an abysmal performance. He was dead last with just around 1,000 votes or so. But he already had gone straight to South Carolina. So it looks as if these same 6 people will be here next week in South Carolina. After that, I think we'll see how the field sorts out further.
Let me just ask you briefly about the other side. There's been some talk about Hillary Clinton's future role. Possibly she could step in as running mate instead of Joe Biden. There's also been talk that maybe she should be the candidate for the Democrats this year. What do you make of all that?
I think the prospect of her replacing President Obama on the ticket is in fact zero, unless there's some bolt from the blue or some change of that sort. I think there is a lot of dream team type speculation of if for some reason Vice President Biden, who is much older than both Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, decided he did not want to run again, that there are many ways in which you could say that she would be a very attractive running mate with the president. But I think the countervailing sense on the Democrats now is that would look too panicky. So unless there is something which makes it seem an easy and graceful thing, I would imagine the Democratic ticket will be President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden running for re-election.
James Fallows, thanks for speaking to us.
My pleasure.